Today, I'm in conversation with Ross Davis, MD at Nottingham-based conversion-focused design agency Strafe Creative. We discuss what are the different approaches to conversion rate optimization for B2B, B2C and startup businesses, and whether all businesses can gain value from CRO. We also talk a little about how Ross, with the help of nearly 100 volunteers, gave something back to the community during the COVID crisis over the last 2 years. Ross, you've been at Strafe Creative for nearly 11 years and worked with a diverse range of companies and industries during that time. Have you become specialist in any particular industry type?
So before I set Strafe up, I actually worked in the games industry, and I did a little bit of area in the kind of mobile gaming. And I think what's kind of naturally happened over time is the friends and contacts that we've made there have kind of moved in positions of power, or whatever you want to call it. And we've been very lucky that we've been able to get quite involved in kind of mobile gaming. And what I mean by that is, you've got your micro purchases, your micro transactions that you're making. And actually, I think gaming and mobile gaming is still a space that probably isn't quite as well thought through as some of the e-commerce. So we're taking basically payments that are done through gaming and I guess applying a more kind of strategic approach to that. So that's definitely one area that we do quite a lot of work. And then the other one that we probably do a lot of in is kind of SaaS, so software as a service. So Microsoft Office nowadays, you don't pay for that on as a disc like you used to. I don't think anyone even uses discs anymore.
You're showing your age now, Ross.
I know, right? Oh no, I've let it slip. But now, obviously, you're paying a monthly fee for those. So the website that you would go to needs to do a good job of convincing someone to sign up for some form of monthly service. So we do quite a lot in that space as well. And they're probably the two areas that we get involved in. I'm always conscious when we say specialisms that I then don't want to spout off 100 other things that we do, because obviously we do get involved in B2B businesses. We do get involved in e-commerce. But I would probably say that a broad kind of spectrum of our work really kind of comes down to the SaaS and gaming work.
So would you say that's more, or both of those channels are kind of subscription based?
Yeah, definitely. So especially with the SaaS one, it's not just about the initial onboarding. Well, there's a couple of steps with that. So obviously you've got to convince the potential user that they want to try this software out. And that in itself obviously needs to be really well thought out from a conversion perspective and making sure we get across the main benefits and why they should do it. But then we also have to consider the actual onboarding journey and how do we get them, once they've committed to actually trialing it, to actually, I guess, for them to find the actual use out of it. So the onboarding is really, really key. And then once they're onboarded, we also have to consider any additional upsells. How do we keep them happy? How do we keep them coming back? How do we make the platform sticky? So there's a lot of elements that go into it. And that's why it's kind of one of our favorite items to kind of work on, because there's all these different avenues and stages in that funnel that we have to consider.
But I think that must be, I suppose, like an ongoing relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend, a normal personal relationship where you have to keep constantly looking at your engagement process and whether people are logging on, whether they're not logging on. How can you encourage them to log on if they haven't logged on? Would that be right?
Yeah, it's a real group effort because we're only really focusing from a design perspective, and we obviously want to see those stats. But normally there's either a third-party marketing company or they might have a marketing firm, I guess, kind of armed to their business already. So a lot of it comes down to us working with them to make sure that we've got the data to figure out what needs to be changed. We obviously have to be very careful that we don't want to just design something because we think it's the right thing. We need to kind of base it on what the data is telling us.
If I was trying to dig a little deeper, I would say that the gaming is probably B2C and the subscription-based stuff is B2B. Would I be right in that?
You can get a little bit of B2C, but it generally falls into a B2B for some of the SaaS work. So there is a fairly decent split there. Obviously, if you had gaming that was related to B2B, there's probably something we're doing wrong.
Yes.
But it's very much B2C with those sort of stages. And yeah, your SaaS can be, there are going to be monthly softwares where they'll be straight to consumer and you're going to want those. And then they normally as well have an enterprise option that might still be used for business as well. And obviously there's loads of softwares that are purely just targeted at businesses as well.
So what would you say is the balance between B2B and B2C, and what would your approach be, and how different would your approach be looking at both of those industries or types?
Yeah, so we're about a 60-40 split, and 60% kind of more towards B2B in all honesty. And that's probably because although we do a lot in the B2C space, especially with kind of these gaming and some of these SaaS projects, they're really large projects, but we only have a few of them, whereas we've got kind of a lot of the B2B. And then I think the difference ends up kind of coming a little bit down to what the user's expectation of it is. So for me, the kind of difference is if we focus on B2C, the likelihood is that this purchase is a little bit more transactional. The likelihood is that they can come on, read a little bit of information about it and be tempted to try it there and then. There's nothing to really hold someone back from either buying it or trialing it for a certain amount of time, or having a month's go at it.
And it's a single decision maker, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. It's a single decision maker. I'm going to make that decision. The cost of B2C stuff isn't normally hugely expensive, so it's an easier decision, and we can generally sell that service in a far more transactional manner. Whereas B2B, as you've kind of mentioned, you've probably got multiple decision makers. They might already be using a piece of software that does something similar. It's not just a case of using it, it's the potential moving across to it from something else. Do they need to get buy-in from lots of other people? Do they have the budget assigned to it? Maybe it's slightly out of budget, because obviously B2B softwares can just generally be more expensive. So, there's going to be more value given. So the idea is there's going to be a cost to that. So we also generally find with B2C, it's very transactional, whereas with a B2B, we might need to consider at what stage they are in the buying journey. So if they're only at information gathering stage, we need to make sure that they find that information and feel value in it. And do we try and get something from them, such as an email address, in exchange for something of value that we can give them and then slowly sell to them? You might have someone who's a little bit further down the line who might want to trial it but not fully commit to it yet, and they might want to attend a webinar or something along those lines. And then you've obviously got people who are going to trial it, and then you've also got the people who will trial it purely on behalf of their boss before their boss needs to try it. So there's a lot more kind of buying behaviors that we have to cater for with a B2B business.
But that's kind of running 4 or 5 different customer journeys, isn't it? Because you need to identify who that person is at the end of the connection to be able to sell them the right sort of things. And messaging is very important to that. How do you manage to cope with that?
I think one of the first places that we just start is going right back to the very beginning before we do any actual kind of design work. And it's very easy to jump in and start making something look beautiful. So instead, really, it's down to the research stages that we're going to do to start with. And one of the key things is probably like the interviews that we always try to do. So not only do we want to interview the directors to get an understanding of what they want, but we probably want to interview some of the sales staff that are constantly being kind of speaking directly to the consumer. But actually, if we can speak to some of the top clients, that's super beneficial to have an understanding of what they like about it, what they don't, what stops them from committing further. And then even just simple things that if someone doesn't buy, you can have little pop-up questions like a Qualaroo kind of messaging account where it pops up to say, hey, what stopped you from buying today? So just trying to get a really rounded understanding of the reasons people do buy, but also the reasons people don't buy is really key. And that also ties in with something that I guess that we like to think of it's our secret sauce, but not so secret because I'm going to just tell it you. But it's all about kind of the additional research that we end up doing. So it's looking on forums, it's looking at the competitors, it's just doing Google searches around that industry that we might be working in to try and get really good understandings of it. Products are a lot easier to research because we can literally type in the name of the product type and ask and write the word review. Yeah. And what's super beneficial at the top of all of those reviews is they pretty much always write the pros and the cons. Yeah. So it's really easy to kind of find some of that information. Whereas obviously, if it's more of a business, we have to more consider what people are saying about the industry. And that's normally a better way of doing it. But even just reading reviews and looking on forums is a really overlooked area. Is a really good one that gives us loads of rounded experience.
You're listening to the shortened version of this podcast. To listen to the full version, visit your favourite podcast player and search for Web Trends Optimize or The Big Lift.